Welcome to another broadcast from MindsYourHealthcast.com. I guess if you saw my last broadcast, you know that I was talking about heal the soil and heal the nation. And basically this is what we're talking about, is how do we go about gaining health in this country. I guess you don't have to be real brilliant to know that we've been in a, quote, health crisis for years and years, and it doesn't seem to be improving. In fact, if anything, it seems to be getting worse. I want to read a little bit about a doctor and a government document, because we're making the transition from health and the need of soil, basically, that can grow good, nutritious food in order to have good health. And so we started laying some of the groundwork the last video. This one, we're going to take it a step further to really emphasize the crisis. And we're always talking about crisis. Now, this is a real crisis. Some of them aren't such a crisis, you know, who's married to who in the entertainment field, or who's divorcing who, or whatever. But this is a real crisis, and it's really not a laughing matter. Now, the name of this government document is called Modern Miracle Men, and it was relating to proper food mineral balance by Dr. Charles Northern, and it was actually reprinted from a article written that was actually read before the U.S. Congress and became incorporated into the government printing office, and they printed it as an official document. But here's some of the comments that were made. The writer of this article said, "This quiet, unballyhooed pioneer and genius in the field of nutrition demonstrates that countless human ills stem from the fact that the impoverished soil of America no longer provides plant foods with the mineral elements essential to human nourishment and health. To overcome this alarming condition, he doctors sick soils, and by seeming miracles raises truly healthy and health-giving fruits and vegetables." Now again, this is written about this particular doctor by the name of Dr. Northern. And so the article starts out then, that was kind of an introduction. "Do you know that most of us today are suffering from certain dangerous diet deficiencies which cannot be remedied until the depleted soil from which our foods come are brought into proper mineral balance? The alarming fact is that foods, fruits, and vegetables and grains now being raised on millions of acres of land that no longer contain enough of certain needed minerals are starving us no matter how much of them we eat." And then further on he says, "Laboratory tests prove that the fruits, the vegetables, the grains, the eggs, and even the milk and the meats of today are not what they were a few generations ago, which doubtless explains why our forefathers thrived on a selection of foods that would starve us. No man of today can eat enough fruits and vegetables to supply his system with the mineral salts he requires for perfect health, because his stomach isn't big enough to hold them. And we are running to big stomachs. It's the bad news to learn that from our leading authorities, that 99% of the American people are deficient in these minerals, and that a marked deficiency in any one of the more important minerals actually results in disease." Now, you probably figured that that was written maybe a year or two ago, or maybe a few years at the most, but actually this document 264 was published by the 74th Congress, Second Session, Senate, back in 1936. Now, if that was the condition in 1936, imagine what we have today. Now, I've said before, and I guess sometimes you do pay attention to what I say, maybe sometimes you don't, and that's okay. I'm here to alert you, and it's up to you what you do with it. But it's interesting that they're talking about the relationship of illnesses or disease to nutritional deficiencies. Now, here's a quote from Dr. Linus Pauling. You know that he won or was awarded the Nobel Prize twice for his work. And he got heavily into nutrition. He was sometimes referred to as the vitamin C idiot because he advocated taking large doses of vitamin C. Now, as you probably know, maybe you don't, the human body does not synthesize vitamin C. And I had wondered why that was the case until I read some interesting information recently. And I think I know why. In our ancestry, we lived off fruits and vegetables heavily and leaves and so forth, which would have all been high in vitamin C. And that was the everyday diet. Hence, we didn't need to synthesize C because we were putting enough of it in our body. However, over the years, this has changed, and it's not working that way anymore. And so now we are forced to supplement. It's interesting that Dr. Pauling outlived by many years all of his major critics who said that he was crazy and it was a waste of time. We didn't need to do all the stuff that he talked about, and as it ended up, he survived all of those critics, all the major ones. And here's what he said: you can trace every sickness, every disease, and every ailment to a mineral deficiency. And he said, sick soil means sick plants, sick animals, and sick people. You know, to me, it's amazing why we have become so blinded with all the fluff and the advertising that goes on with all these miracle drugs, and every one of the miracle drugs, guess what? They are pretty much to be treating the symptoms of deficiency. Now, isn't that interesting? At least it is to me. And, you know, there's been a lot written about all this, and it never hits the evening news, the 5 or 6 o'clock news, like some of the other events that, in my mind, are considerably less important. I mean, what could be more important than the health of a nation that's costing, last year, I think it was about $2.7 trillion, and that about probably in the high 90% of those issues that were treated, barring accidents and birth defects and degeneration because of poor nutrition, bulk of it was nutrition, the lack thereof. And the minerals are key players. I've said that before, but I'm not sure it's sinking in. Minerals are the catalysts that make everything happen in the body. Without the minerals, the body cannot function properly. And I don't know, I guess it's just hard to want to buy that anything so simple, more minerals, more health, it's very difficult. I mean, people, it just doesn't want to sink in. I mean, we think we're so high-tech, and we know all this stuff, and there's no reason why. I mean, we got plenty of food. It's true. We do have plenty of volume. But I'm going to read you something in a minute that might wake you up because I think it's fascinating. But just some of the things that I ran across. Here's Scientific American, 2011. Dirt poor. Have fruits and vegetables become less nutritious? And, of course, the answer is yes. The main culprit in this disturbing nutritional trend is soil depletion. Soil depletion. A landmark study done at the University of Texas at Austin's Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, published in December 2004, the Journal of the American College of Nutrition. They studied U.S. Department of Agriculture nutritional data from both 1950 and 1999 for 43 different vegetables and fruits, finding reliable declines in the amount of protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, vitamin C over the past half century. I mean, even they recognized it, and I wouldn't consider that they would reduce their space to dribble if they didn't consider it important. Likewise, big study was compiled in 2009, nutrient depletion of our foods. And this was actually a big study by a gentleman out of Canada. See, they've got this, unfortunately, the same problem that we do here. And so he talks about all the issues, including GMOs, which we haven't mentioned and probably won't even get time to get into much, except that genetically altering the food has even added a complication to make it worse. And we haven't talked about that too much. We've brought it up, but not too much. Declining fruit and vegetable nutrient composition. What is the evidence? This was also another one, University of Texas, Austin. And this one was published in 2009 also. So they likewise talk about all this. This is the actual study, I believe, that was quoted in this Scientific American. Yeah, I believe it was. And here's the whole study, and they go into it heavily. It has been noted since the 1940s that yield increases produced by fertilization, irrigation, and other environmental means tend to decrease the concentrations of minerals in plants. And then they quote specifically raspberry plants grown in soil with 12 parts per million of phosphorus and fertilized with additional amounts of 0, 22, 44 parts per million phosphorus. After 8 months, plants grown with 44 parts per million of added phosphorus had around a 20% higher concentration of phosphorus than unfertilized plants by dry weight basis. However, the concentrations of all 8 other measured minerals declined, usually by 20 to 55%. Thus, the fertilized plants contained larger absolute amounts of minerals than the unfertilized, but these amounts were sufficiently diluted by the increased dry matter that all mineral concentrations declined except for phosphorus. In other words, they balked the plant. It grew up and looked like a nice big plant, but there was nothing to it. And in most cases, it's fiber. And fiber, of course, does not do well in the human body as far as nutrition because it's a cellulose and we do not have an enzyme to break down cellulose. In fact, the interesting thing about it, I don't know of any plants, animals, or even insects that can digest cellulose because they don't have an enzyme for it, per se. Now, if you are really astute, you probably thought, hey, what about these termites? They live off of eating food in the wood. They eat the fiber in the wood. And so, therefore, they must digest it. Well, yes and no. It's interesting, but in the gut tract of a termite, there is a bacterial form that lives that does, in fact, have an enzyme that breaks down cellulose. So they depend on the bacteria in their bowel tract to break it down. Otherwise, they couldn't break it down either. Just an interesting little tidbit. I thought you might find it intriguing. So now we want to talk about a study that was done on diet plans. Now, it's interesting because in our world today, we are suffering with some problem called obesity. And one of these studies, and I don't know that I'm even going to get to it, but quoted the fact that we have a terrible problem in this country. About 34% are out and out deficient, and the rest are in big trouble, one way or the other. Another large percentage also have a big problem. So, what we have here then is the people are going on diets to lose off this weight that's being created by a deficiency primarily because they're eating nutrient poor food loaded with fats and bad oils of all kinds and lots of sugar and so forth. So that makes a problem. Now, in order to try to deal with this problem, then we come out with all these diet plans. And so we're going to analyze here something called the prevalence of micronutrient deficiency in popular diet plans. And I think you're going to find this very fascinating. So here's a research article called The Prevalence of Micronutrient Deficiency in Popular Diet Plans. Again, as I say, because of all of the bad food nutritionally deficient, especially in minerals, that people are eating, we've got a big problem. So here's what this study has to say, and this is pretty new, 2010. It was published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Okay, so it says background. This is in the abstract at the beginning. Research has shown micronutrient deficiency to be scientifically linked to a higher risk of overweight, obesity, and other dangerous and debilitating diseases. With more than 2/3 of the U.S. population overweight or obese, research showing that 1/3 are on a diet at any given time, a need existed to determine whether current popular diet plans could protect followers from micronutrient deficiency by providing minimum levels of 27 micronutrients as determined by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration reference daily intake. Okay, so they did this big study, and the diets they chose were the Atkins for Life diet, the South Beach diet, the DASH diet, and the DASH Best Life diet. So there's 4 different diets, and they say right off that they're looking for 27 micronutrients, but 6, vitamin B7, D12, vitamin D, vitamin E, chromium, iodine, and molybdenum, were identified as consistently low or non-existent in all 4 of those diets. In other words, you weren't getting any of that. Now they're basing the nutrient content on some of the tables that have been published by the Department of Agriculture, how up to date they are and how accurate, although they have said before that there's been a constant decline in mineralization of the soil from way back. So those early doctors in the early 1900s who were recognizing all these degenerative illnesses were starting to develop significantly, and that the cause was deficient food in especially key minerals and nutrients, and the treatment was to feed them some food grown in good soil that was minerally dense, and their problems disappeared, and the people who were eating it right along were not getting sick. Now, I don't know. I have sometimes a big problem in figuring out how we can see data and a problem and a solution to the problem, and yet we keep hoping for some magic pill or drug that we spend a fortune for is somehow going to get rid of it, which it doesn't. There is no drug that I know of that actually is a cure. If you read all the studies in the medical journals, it always says for the relief of or management of the symptoms of blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they're not even telling you it's curing it. They're telling you they're managing the symptoms. What does it take to click that we're spending trillions of dollars for medications to manage the symptoms of deficiency? You know, what does it take for that to click? You would think that we would be beating the doors down of places that had some good real food and buy some real food, because we have to eat food anyhow to stay alive, instead of wasting our money on taking billions of dollars worth of drugs that on the surface they say they don't cure you, they only manage symptoms. You know, what does it take? Now here's what this article says. Several scientific studies have established this strong correlation between nutrient deficiency and the condition of overweight and obesity, including one study that found an 80.8% increased likelihood of being overweight or obese in micronutrient subjects. In addition, suboptimal intake of certain micronutrients is an established factor in a multitude of dangerous health conditions and diseases, including resistance to infection, birth defects, cancer, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis. Ding, 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 ding. What does it take to understand that the problem is not a lack of more drugs? Everybody's lined up everywhere waiting for the new latest drug to be introduced. And as I say, read the material. It doesn't say it cures your cardiovascular problem. What it says, it manages the symptoms. But in the meantime, the cardiovascular system is going downhill. Yeah, I just find it so difficult to understand how we could be so blind to so much obvious. According to the latest statistics from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, it's not that the government doesn't know it. They're not going to do anything about it. They're going to let the people buy the products that are put out by their protected industries, the pharmaceutical interest and the agricultural modern growers, the processing food industry and their growers. Okay, America's overweight obesity epidemic now affects more than 2 out of 3 adults and 16% of children. Okay, so its obese population is now greater than its overweight population, with more than 34% of American adults being obese. This has caused a sharp increase in the number of dieting attempts undertaken by the overweight or obese individuals with the intent to lose weight and or improve their health. That's what they think is going to happen. Okay, so what they did this study of these 4 diets, and they counted up, again, based on provided information. So this is at its best. My suspicion, it's even worse than this, but this is at its best. Okay, so they looked at these 27 essential micronutrients. The 27 essential micronutrients used in this study were vitamin A, vitamin B1, vitamin B2, vitamin B3, 5, and 6, and 7, and vitamin B9, which is folate or folic acid, vitamin B12, vitamin C, D, E, K, choline, calcium, chromium, copper, iron, iodine, potassium, magnesium, manganese, molybdenum, sodium, phosphorus, selenium, and zinc. Okay, and so they based it on government recommendations, not whether that, I mean, we're talking minimals, the government recommendations. Well, here is the minimum daily a need or requirement of a vitamin or a mineral. Okay, so at its best, it's low to begin with, and this didn't even come up to those. Now, here's what they found out. The South Beach, Atkins, Dash, and the Dash Best Life, all of those were highly insufficient. South Beach, 22.22%. Atkins, 44.44%. Dash, 51.85%. The Dash Best Life, 55.56%, with an average of 43.53% on all of these. That means if you ate those diets, you were not even hardly getting, in most cases, half, and at the most, slightly over half of the amount that you should have of those 27 nutrients. Now that's not good. Now, they did something interesting. They decided to calculate how much in calories on those diets would you have to eat to get 100% of the minimum daily requirement. I'm not talking about what's probably needed, because many years ago, remember I mentioned before a book called Biochemical Individuality, and this book was by a Dr. Clayton, who, this guy did a tremendous study on the body. And anyhow, biochemic individuality says that certain people need more of certain nutrients than others because of uniqueness of their particular system. But so here we're talking about bare minimums. We're not even talking about what I would consider good nutrition. I'm talking about bare minimums. Okay. On the South Beach diet, if you were to eat the number of calories of food on that diet to get 100% of the 27 basic nutrients that they determined based on minimum daily requirements, you would have to eat 18,800 calories of food on that diet to get 100% of the nutrients you need. On the Atkins diet, you would have to eat 37,500 calories of food in order to get 100% of the nutrients. On the Dash, 33,500. On the Best Life by Dash, 20,500. And the average of all of them was 27,575 calories a day you would have to consume to bring up the nutrient level to where it would be 100% of the average daily requirement, not best case scenario, only basic minimum. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you the craziness of our society. We eat a bunch of lousy food that does not have enough nutrients to actually take care of what we need. Now remember, they said some of these, like iodine and so forth, they found that there was almost none. Chromium, vitamin E, D, B7, molybdenum. Now, you don't probably know much about molybdenum, but molybdenum is a very basic requirement for liver function related to the softer pathways, and it's very important in red blood cell development and a lot of things. So it has value in the body. Most people, as I say, have never heard of it. But these ones, and chromium is very important for the metabolism of sugar and insulin, for it to work right. And so those were almost non-existent in these plans. So it was very difficult to get it if it wasn't even there. And I'm saying that this study is generous compared to what's really going on. This only scratches the surface. But now, here is a regular study, and they didn't even consider what kind of food it was. It was just food. Now, I know that it's even worse than that. If you go out and take the average processed food and you do an analysis for nutrients, you're going to find it is even worse than what they're talking about here. But they're saying the average food. Forget organic or any of that. And incidentally, about organic, I have to throw in the advantage of organic food is not necessarily that it has more nutrients. I've done testing myself personally with products that were grown organically, and the nutrient level was almost zilch. Why? Because if you grow organically a plant in a depleted soil, guess what? You still don't have any nutrients. That's the problem. So you cannot just depend because it has a certified organic label that you're going to get lots of nutrients. I don't know how many pieces of fruit or vegetables that I have bitten into, and I know immediately that there's nothing there. And the ones that I've tested, for sure it's nothing there. You've got a lot of fiber, bulk, and you've got a little coloring, but almost no nutrients. It's the minerals that cause the food to taste sweet and nourishing. And it satisfies a part of your brain. I grew up in my early life in an area where the food was grown in real soil. It wasn't loaded with pesticides, and it was not fertilized with chemical fertilizers. And consequently, I know what a good piece of fruit or vegetable or even chicken's eggs or whatever, what they should taste like. And they don't taste like that today. Most people have grown up tasting them as they are, and they have acquired a taste for it because that's what there is. But that's not the right answer. Now, sometimes I've heard, I have to verify it, but the organic growing industry, many times, since it's become a catchword, you know, the same growers that have been growing the garbage for years see that, well, a lot of people want to buy organic, and so what do? They put out this product, says it was organically grown, and I understand right at the beginning of the growing season there's a notch that they can throw in some pesticides and or other stuff before they then stop doing it to get their certification as organic. So I can't personally verify it, but I've heard it from some pretty reliable sources, people that are involved with some growers. So anyhow, even though the fruit looks like fruit, it isn't fruit because there's nothing there. And consequently, to me, it's like eating a picture of food. If you chewed up a piece of paper with a picture of an apple on it, and you ate 2 or 3 of those sheets, you would feel like there's something in your stomach, but it would be nothing. And when you eat one of these pieces of fruit that has no nutrients in it, you're eating a lot of fiber, which is not digestible. And the problem is now that you're feeling full, but you're not satisfied. Because I think that the body sends a message, get more food, because I'm not getting the nutrients. And so that's part of the obesity problem, that people are not satisfied in what they're eating. So I'm hoping I'm kind of giving you an idea of what the problem is. Now, we have talked about the fact that soil is very important. And so the question is, of course, what are we going to do about it, or can we do anything about it? Well, the answer is yes. There are things that can be done about it. It's been known for some of it for centuries, but you don't hear about it. And some of it is more modern. Going back to the article I read you, in 1936, all this work was done in the early 1900s, all the way up through the 30s. They were finding out that nutrient-poor soil was producing nutrient-poor food, which was bringing on all kinds of deficiency diseases. And of course the pharmaceuticals hopped in and said, oh wow, you got these problems, these symptoms, so we got a market to market our product to manage those symptoms. So we'll make you feel a little better while your body's falling apart. But we know you're going to be back for more serious problems and hence more expensive treatments. So they're not complaining, and the food growers, the people, they throw some extra sugar and bad oils and so forth into the food, and they make it look pretty and they make it taste very sweet and very fatty, but there's nothing there. Now we have this big obesity problem. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we need to do something about the soil. And a lot of the material I mentioned last time, very good book called Secrets of the Soil by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird, written several years ago. They looked into the problem. You know, this, as I say, it's not a brand new problem. And so this book was looking for the publishing date. I didn't think to write it down. 1989. So since 1989 they knew about it. And also I mentioned before a book by Rachel Carson that was published way back and republished again in 2002. Originally it goes way back to very small numbers, 1962 when it first hit, big hit, warning about what they were doing with the pesticides and all the junk that was being added to the soil and to the plants. It's interesting to me, and I've mentioned this before, and I'll throw it in again. I have a patient who has worked with the Department of Agriculture and Research, and he was telling me that the fact is that plants, when they're sick, they generate a chemical that attracts insects to come and eat them up. Now, you know, I've known that in nature that everything as it's decaying or dying off, there is a cleanup process that nature has provided to get rid of it. And so all of these work together in harmony to make everything clean and to keep everything going as it should so that the planet doesn't get overly polluted, except for people. That one's a little more difficult. But sometimes major catastrophes help in thinning out the population. So maybe that's what nature does in order to kind of keep things from getting out of hand. At any rate, the thing that was, I thought, so interesting to me is, okay, we grow a plant, the plant is sick, it sends out a message for the insects to come and eat it up. So what do? We kill the insects by saturating the plant with a chemical, and then we feed that chemical-laden sick plant to humans for food. Kind of interesting. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the next broadcast, the actual methodologies that have been around, many of them, as I say, for centuries, and some more modern. When I say more modern, from, say, the 1800s on, late 1800s, early 1900s, and some middle 1900s. But there are people who got concerned about all of this, and so they have come up with some systems. And so we're going to be talking about biodynamic agriculture. We're going to talk about the Albert system. We're going to talk about Dr. Carrie Ream's biological theory of ionization, methods of measuring the soil and supplying nutrients to bring it up to par so that it's healthy. And there's some other things, I'll throw this in, the enigma of the towers, and we'll talk about that aspect, as well as some other highly sophisticated things that have a scientific basis but sound totally off the wall, and give you some things to think about in terms of having good food. Well, it seems like I'm trying to keep these shorter because I know people's attention span today is not too long. And if you aren't careful, they'll come onto a broadcast and they'll watch it for a little bit, but if there's nothing big time exciting happening, they're off someplace else because we have such a short attention span anymore. We don't want to get too much in depth in anything. I mean, that's heavy. We don't get too much heavy stuff in our head. I mean, we want a summary. Why do you think all those cliff notes and all those books have sold so well? We don't want to get into the depth of it. We just want the general idea. And sometimes that isn't going to do the job. It's not going to give us the information we need to really understand the problem. Okay, so now you know what the problem is. The problem is we have a fat country that's overweight, 34% blatantly obese, and another 30-some% that are overweight. We have all these diet plans that are loaded with junk food, which actually don't supply us with the nutrients we need. And in fact, if it did, we'd have to eat so many calories of it that we would be fat eating all the junk calories to try to get some nutrients. So it's a major problem. So then it gets down to, why is the food worthless? The food's worthless because big money interests are more concerned with high profits than they are providing nutrient-dense food, which would then reduce the health bill, but then that would upset the pharmaceuticals because they make all their big money off of managing the symptoms of deficiency. I hope that clicks with you. You're not buying drugs that help your deficiency problem. You are managing the symptoms so you don't feel quite as bad while your body is falling apart. But at some point down the road, you're going to have the heart attack, you're going to have the stroke, you're going to have the cancer, you're going to have arthritic problems, you're going to have neurological degeneration. And if you look at the statistics, they're going up. It doesn't take any genius to understand that. Anyhow, I think I've given you enough to wrestle with. And so this next broadcast, we're going to actually get into some of the methodologies that you might want to look into if your health is important to you. If you would rather keep your head in the sand, take a few pills every time you feel a little bad, and hope that by not feeling quite as bad by taking the pills, you're solving your problem, of course you're going to find that that is not true, and hence, big problem. Anyhow, it was nice to be with you again, and this is meant to be a wake-up call because this is, to me, one of the most important life-saving pieces of information you could have that ought to tune you in to what do we need to do to be healthy and to not have all that weight. When I was young, no one was obese. In my school that I went to, I knew one kid that was heavy. In our neighbors and friends, only rarely did we run into somebody that was heavy. Everybody was thin and trim. And they were still where I came from, in West Virginia, where there still was, and even today, still some good soil. The people were healthy. No one hardly ever went to a doctor unless they broke an arm or got a bad cut or something. It was just a totally different ballgame. There weren't all the drugs in the market, 15 to 18,000 circulating at any given month. They didn't need all of that. And hardly anybody had any surgery except for, as I say, some type of injury or something very unusual. And it was just a totally different ball game than it is today. So now we see that everything has changed. I mean, we've gotten more sophisticated. We have mammoth hospitals with mammoth pieces of equipment that cost millions and millions of dollars, and we have these mammoth bills to run all this equipment to find where the parts of our body are coming apart, but we aren't doing anything to correct the problem. I mentioned on a previous broadcast about regenerating organs, but much more money in transplants. When I was young, no one ever even mentioned the word organ transplant because nobody needed any. The only people who had problems, like severe alcoholics, meant they had some other issues. They were destroying their liver and sometimes their brain nervous system and so forth, but it was the exception rather than the rule. Anyhow, I think I've given you enough, so until our next broadcast, which will complete this on the actual soil methodologies, both of analyzing and making corrections, so we can grow some good food. Don't forget to go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and don't forget to keep looking. If you are new, go back. There's almost 200 broadcasts or videos on various aspects. And I think you will find it important information if you're interested in information. If you don't want to be bothered with it, if you want to take a pill for every symptom, it's a free country. And if that's what you want to do, it's certainly your choice, and I would not talk you out of it. So until the next broadcast, be healthy.